Tafnun Beis Halacha Beis. So it's a continuation of the previous halacha. In halacha Aleph it said that if you kasher before chametz becomes usher, there's no nat bar nat, and therefore you could have all kinds of kulas, no in the binyarim and all those kind of things. Maybe kasher after those.
No in the binyarim.
Right. Right. The kli does not have to be in the binyarim. Since it's not not barnat, whatever that's what we talked about a few times ago. It's not barnat, and therefore you're allowed to kasher even if it's ben yomoy and even if it's no shishim, all kinds of cool that you can do. That's what the Machaber had said. The Machaber and the Ramah had said. We talked to them. Many of the Chonim argue, but that's what they had said, that it's not barnat, and therefore you can kasher even when it's ben yomoy as long as you kasher before the 4th hour. That was halacha aleph, and halacha beis is a continuation, so a little bit of a taking back of that, but a continuation, which is the Machaber says yesh li zar milahagel kli habosor kli hachol biachad. When you're going to kasher for Pesach, it's not like treif that you just have one kli or a few kelim and all treif that you kasher together. Here you kasher presumably loads of dishes for Pesach, including milchigs and fleishigs. So the Machaber says you should be careful to not kasher milchigs and fleishigs dishes together. El im kain echad mihim eini ben yom, unless one of them is eini ben yom. And so this is a continuation. Before he told you for Pesach, for the chametz shaboy, you don't have to worry about it being eini ben yom. But the milchigs and fleishig shaboy, then you do have to be concerned, because the chashash is if you cast them together at the same time, you put in a milchig fork and a fleishig fork, then there won't be nat barnat, and you'll then you'll make the water treif. You'll be making, well, if you make the water treif, then the male will make the dishes treif. Then there won't be that barat, and then you make the dishes treif. Either like you're saying, because the water becomes treif, or because the kelim will touch each other. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, but so you might make the things treif, and therefore
you can't touch each other, and you got a problem. Even if one of them is Aino and yayin, the other one is yayin, you're gonna have a problem.
No, it wouldn't be a problem, because by the time the blias get in and out, it'll be not barat. It's only problem if they're both ben yayin, and the blias together will become basar b'chol. At that point, you'll be stuck. Once the blias transfer another time, then you don't have to worry about them becoming basar b'chol. Because if they transfer and join and become basar b'chol, you're stuck. If they transfer without,
it doesn't become basar b'chol.
It won't become basar b'chol. Correct. So that place, let's say the
basar and cholav in the keli, but not basar b'chol.
Correct. And the basar will be not barnat. The basar by the time the guy will be not barnat. You don't have to worry about that. The cholav it's a milchig kli, so you'll be fine. You'll be covered. So the Machaber says you have to make sure one of them will be eini ben yom. Okay. Now I forgot to mention that this din is going to talk about eini ben yom, and I forgot to mention the Bir halacha at the end of the last halacha brings a minig from earlier Achronim, a minig that when you kasher for Pesach, it shouldn't be eini ben yom, it should be 3 days old. It shouldn't have been used for 3 days. I don't know where that minig comes from. He doesn't explain it. So okay, such a minig. Okay. So anyhow, so he says the din is we have to make sure one of them is eini ben yom. And the Ramah says kol shekain. So before we go on, this Machaber is very much limiting what it said beforehand. Right? The din beforehand, we said this big kula that you can kasher even when it's ben yomer for chametz, is saying but you have to realize that you don't want to treif up your dishes while you're doing that. So you might get rid of the chametz, but you don't want to make them basar b'chol. So when you get a kasher of Pesach, you have to kasher all the milchig dishes at once, or all the fleishig dishes, or at least one set should be eini ben yom. And the Ramah says now by us, kol shekain kli shel iser, kol shekain the kli of iser, you have to make it be eini ben yom, and that's because by kli of iser there isn't any possibilities of not barnat. Of course, it has to be eini ben yom. Al kein nagu, therefore the minig is shlo lahagel shum kli ben yom. The minig is that we don't kasher any kelim when they're ben yom. This is what Ramah says. I mean, even on Pesach, that even for Pesach where you could potentially kasher ben yom, because for Pesach they held that you really could. Even so, you can't do that. The minig is to not do that because of these problems. So there are more. Well, because of these potential problems, therefore you can't do it. Okay, what he means is because. So let's talk about what he means. Okay, there's a question whether he means what exactly he means to say. But because of these potential problems, therefore he says you shouldn't kasher. He could mean two things. One he could mean is because the milchigs and fleishig that the Machaber spoke about, that you'll kasher the milchigs and fleishig dishes together, or he could mean iser. He just said kol shekain kli shel iser because the second one was he said is a chashash. So we'll talk about. Just give me a second. We'll get into it. Okay. Okay, the Magen Avraham on this din tells you to look at in your din Tzadi. Okay, and the Pri Megadim tells you what he means to say it like this. The Machaber over there talks about this case where the two dishes are in at the same time, and the Machaber and the Ramah have a machlokes over there. The Machaber says that l'chatchila you shouldn't do it, have a milchig and fleishig dish together, because of the chashashas, either they'll touch each other or it'll become basar b'chol in the water. Those different chashashas, but it's only l'chatchila. But if you did it, then it's fine. Okay, the Machaber holds that's considered not parnat in that case. And the Ramah says that b'diavad it's not good. That's not considered not parnat. Okay, so what the machlokes is just leave for now. That's not negata. That's your day shadow. What the machlokes is, but the point is, the Pri Megadim says is that so the Machaber who holds that b'diavad, if you would do milchus and fleishes together, it would be mutter b'diavad. So he says, usually, sorry, you should be careful, but it's not the end of the world because if you'll mess up, it won't be the end of the world. So you should be mocked. You shouldn't do it together because he says in your day you shouldn't do it. But if you'll end up doing it, that's okay. If you'll end up doing it, that won't be the end of the world. The Ramah who holds that b'diavad it's no good. B'diavad if you do milchus and fleishes dishes at the same time when they're ben yomer, it's no good. So therefore he says, he has the meaning to not do it at all because the potential if you mess up and you kasher all your Pesach dishes, and some are milchus and some are fleishes, and two go in at the same time, the potential is to make a check b'diavad. So therefore you shouldn't. That's what he has the meaning to not do it at all. Okay, that is how he's medayik. While the Mechaber just says yesh lizar, just like it's a good thing to do, and the Ramah takes is stricter because the Ramah holds that the evidence is so good. Therefore, he takes more of a tab b'hachma. Okay.
Zera to Benyamin. Is that it?
Zera.
I mean, right now it's Aino Benyamin. It's fine.
Right now, no. So the Ramah says you can cash it when it's Aino Benyamin. Okay. Again, in Halacha Aleph it said you can cash even when it's Ben Yomer for Pesach. The Mechaber said, but you're going to mess up because of the Chomer Shabbat. But the Mechaber said, but you might mess up because of milchus and fleishes. So at least one of the kelim has to be Aino Ben Yomer. In one meaning, either the milchus or the fleishes, one of the sets have to be Aino Ben Yomer. And the Ramah says the meaning is you never cash a kelim that are any of them Bnei Yomer. And the reason is because according to the way
only if it's a Ben Yomer. You shouldn't do this only with the Binyamin. It's Aino Binyamin, it's fine.
Right. It has to be Aino Binyamin. Once it's Aino Binyamin, then it's open to you. You do whatever you want to it. So the Pri Megadim, the way he's saying, fits in with the way he's medayik in the Taz. The Taz says, the Ramah who says, you shouldn't do a clean unless it's Aino Binyamin, is because what the Mechaber said. Because you might do milchus and fleishes together. Okay? So that's what in your day, he said, the Mechaber in your day said that the milchus and fleishes together would be mutter b'diavad. So he says, yesh l'torah. The Ramah holds milchus and fleishes b'diavad is usher, so he says therefore the meaning is to not do it at all. It always should be Aino Binyamin. I mean, if you do just one dish, you have one spoon to cash from Pesach, it should be Aino Binyamin, even though you can't go wrong, because it's not going to be milchus and fleishes. It's just one dish, but it's a chash of milk that you might do basar at the same basar and chalav dishes at the same time. The Magen Avram, this is a Pri Megadim thing. The Magen Avram says the chash is that you might do kelim shel iser, which is the words of the Ramah. Kol sheken kli shel iser. You should be careful because the kol sheken the kli shel iser has to be Aino Binyamin. Al keino agree that you should be ben yomer, bnei yomer. So the Magen Avram is medayik that he's calling on kelim shel iser. His chash is might do kelim shel iser. If his gzeira is up to kelim shel iser, then it has nothing to do with the machlokes in tzadihei. That machlokes in there has to do with not parnat. If he's talking about chash of kelim shel iser, no, not by kelim shel iser. So then, according to that, it's a different chash. It's not. You should always have the kelim be Aino Binyamin, even for Pesach, when you really can't go wrong. Because also you might do if that's how you cash it for Pesach, you might cash it like that for year round for some other trade thing, and therefore it's sort of a minute to do it. And even the Mechaber could have helped with this minute. And then the chash of kelim shel iser, anybody can hold it. And whatever, he just didn't hold it a minute. Okay, so you're if you're listening, we're missing. There's a little bit of something different over here because the Pri Megadim is the one who said both of these things. He said that he's the one who notices this subtlety between the Taz and the Magen Avram as to whether the chash is of basar b'chalav or of iser, which would mean that the Magen Avram would go even according to the Mechaber. But he also explains when the Magen Avram says ayin simin tzadi hey sif gimel, he means to say is that the Pri Megadim one who says is when he says ayin tzadi hey sif gimel, that's like the whole Magen Avram. He means to say is. And that will explain to you why the Mechaber just says yesh lizar and the Ramah is machmir. Okay, so it's not really according to the Pri Megadim, the Magen Avram is not exactly Shittasik. Okay, it's not exactly reading right. Okay, maybe I'm being too complicated. Anyhow, okay, but that's the shot. Okay, so there's two things. Either it's a chash of that you will do a trade kelim or you do basar b'chalav, but whichever case it is, the Ramah says the meaning is that the kelim should be Aino b'nei yomer when you cash them, which the Mechaber said you don't have to do. There are ways to cash even when it's ben yomer. Okay, so now I have a question. The Ramah said that you have to have the minhag is that the kelim should be Aino b'nei yomer. Does he mean that literally? That the kelim have to be Aino b'nei yomer? You must have kelim Aino b'nei yomer when you kasher. Is that what he means? Literally, like what he says, or does he mean to just say is you can't be samech on what it says on Halacha Aleph? Don't assume kelim of chametz have not parnat on them, because there's possible ways to go wrong. So therefore, don't be samech on not parnat. Okay? Well, if you're not going to be samech on not parnat, then it'll have to be Aino b'nei yomer. Okay. Does he mean that literally it must be Aino b'nei Yomer? Or just means
the question is b'diavad, if it did it.
No, I don't know about that. Oh, that's a good question. I didn't even think of that. That's a good question. What would he say b'diavad? I didn't mean that.
What else is Nafkin?
Nafkin is, what else do you want to have shishim? You want to have shishim in the water connected to the keli.
You want to have shishim?
Yeah, you have a pot that has 100 cubic inches of water, and you have your keli is only 1 cubic inch of metal. You know that you have shishim connected. So you want to cash like that. So that thing is, I'm not saying it's not for not. I'm not saying I'm cashing because it's not for not. I'm like, I don't have to be. So that, and I'm not being makel as halacha al says, but I'm not making it Aino ben Yomer either.
What would be the problem if it's shishim connected in the water? What would be the problem?
So if you say is the Rama just means this, don't be samach not for not. So then I'm covered. I'm not being samach not for not. But if the Rama thinks al kein nohagu that you only kasher kein and then Aino ben Yomer. So if he means that literally the minhag is to always be Aino ben Yomer, so then I'm not doing that. My key is ben Yomer.
Yeah, over the minhag.
Right. This minhag, the minhag is that you have to kasher. The minhag is you always do. Even the halacha al, this long halacha says you can kasher however you like to for Pesach. The Ramah says that sort of at the end of that halacha. This is like the end of that halacha says. That's the end.
The question is the minhag also give a dispensation for anything for shishim? Yeah. And I'm not talking about most people don't have shishim connect in the water. But I have about shishim that's also not being.
That's exactly the question. That's exactly my question. Does he mean to say he's saying the normal? Don't be samach not for not. So the normal thing to do is make Aino ben Yomer.
You're saying if you want to be the minhag is strictly Aino ben Yomer. I don't know. The minhag is saying that for normal people about the minhag is Aino ben Yomer. But if you have shishim, you have also been the kai of the minhag.
I agree. Right. So I'm agreeing. Why do I feel like you're saying it's different than one of his two brothers? That is what I'm saying.
But it covers both.
I don't think you think so. Why is it both? Okay. Why is it both? If he means it literally,
you're covering the person. If the child is concerned maybe going wrong, you're covered.
Right. So, yeah.
If concern is the minhag, are you also covered?
No. That's one side. What you just said is two sides. There's more one side of mine. That the minhag is to not be samach not for not, and to do not say not for not, and you have to do other things to be more careful. Okay. The other side is that the Rambam means that literally the minhag is you must be Aino ben Yomer because of reasons, because of Kashrus not for not. Therefore, the minhag develops.
If you don't, you get pushed for not doing the kind of minhag.
Right.
But I'm telling you, the minhag does not mean exclusive Aino ben Yomer. It means don't do a situation that could possibly come to not banana situation.
So you're saying that's one side. That's one side, and I agree with you. I myself would agree with you that that's what the Rambam means to say. So he means don't be samach not for not. The minhag is to not do not for not, and to do the things that work for all Yisurim, like shishim or Aino ben Yomer. Okay, that's I would say like you. Wait a second. I would say like you. And so you would say that if a guy wants to do shishim, that would be fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I would agree with you. Okay. However.
That's what I said. There's dafka and dafka.
Right.
No other exclusion.
Okay. So the other. Okay. So now the other side to say that I would have said your way. Okay. The only thing is it's very negay. It's very much negay. We're about to tell you why it's very negay, which is let me explain a little bit why you would think to say it has to be dafka and before I tell you why I'm saying that. The reason to say that is because saying something should be. To say that you should not be samach not for not. Why wouldn't you be samach not for not? Why would the Ramah have a minute to not be samach not for not? What's wrong with that? The Mechaber had a way to deal with it. He said, make sure one of the kingdoms is Aino ben Yomer, or only catch one thing at a time. Do all the phrases together, and then do all the nuchos together. Why do you have to? What's the reason for the minhag? The reason for the minhag is because it's a sophistication to understand that I could catch all these forks, and then all these forks. And they're all b'nei Yomer, but not the two sets of forks together. Right, so for an average person, it's too complicated. Right, that's the reason for the minhag, is make it easier for people that they shouldn't go wrong. Right. So from that side, there's a sense that says, Aino ben Yomer is really simple and straightforward. Don't use it for 24 hours and then kasher. Telling people to have shishim gets more complicated, especially if you remember that shishim builds up in the kelim. If I do one fork, there's going to be shishim. Like two. If I do 24, there's not going to be shishim anymore. The blias keep coming out. So people, you have to be more sophisticated to be able to understand that if I'm going to do shishim, I have to do it in exactly this way. I have to measure it, and I have to remember I can only do one fork. I can't do 3 forks. So it gets too complicated. So it could be for the simplicity of it. The point of the minhag is to make things simple, to make it that people don't make mistakes. So the simplicity is don't use it for 24 hours. Everybody understands that. That's clear and to the point that everyone understands that. And that could be the reason for the minhag. Okay, now, OU's poskim have taken the stricter way of saying it. What I said to you is the more chomer way, which is that he means only Eina ben Yomi. He means don't use any other kulas. Okay? And I will have to admit.
Is that what it gave?
Yes, yeah. Hold on, Reg. We come to exactly how it's again. Yes, but I have to tell you that the reason why the OU's poskim said this is because Rabbi Luban showed them a dig in the Magen Avraham. Okay, to say that that's what he means. And I have seen this Magen Avraham a bunch of times. That I've seen it with Rabbi Lubin, and I thought he was 100% right. And I looked at it again in preparing for today, and I haven't a clue what he's talking about. So I've looked at it. I've seen it who knows how many plenty of times beforehand, and that it's Mukubal, Rabbi Lubin's Magen Avraham, who says that it's even shishim you can't do. You must do it in Binyamin. And I looked at it again now, and I haven't a clue what he's talking about. I did not get to call him this morning to try to understand what he's doing. He could probably explain it to me better. I'm telling you, I've seen it before. But it happens to be that the Chok Yaakov, right on the din, says it like that. Chok Yaakov says that the minig is to do, does make a difference even if the shishim, the minig is it has to be in the beginning. And we're going to talk about Darkei Tshuva in a second, who also understood it this way. Okay? The Chok Yaakov is right on the din, the Darkei Tshuva is in Kufid Gimel, we're going to talk about it in a second.
They both say that you should, no matter what.
When the Ramah says Eina ben Yomi, he means the minig is Eina ben Yomi, which understanding to mean is that the point of the minig is to make things simple. People shouldn't get mistakes in that. Barnad and Basar B'chol is different than Isser, and all these are too sophisticated. So Eina ben Yomi is a simple way to deal with that. Okay? And Shishim is somewhere in the middle. Shishim is more complicated. It's not the same. It's not Barnad. It's not that complicated, but it's too complicated for your average Joe in the street making chesronis with Shishim. So we just say is just make it Eina ben Yomi, and life will be simple. Okay?
And doesn't though you also say that you could kasher if the grape juice?
That's exactly where we're heading. That's exactly where we're heading. Okay. Now, okay. Now, you have to realize that the Prima Gadol we said beforehand that said the reason for the Kashrus is because you might do basar b'chola, because you might do milk and meat at the same time, because you might do chom treif, would not lead you to think that the Ramah means to ask to say you can't do shisha. Okay, it wouldn't have made you think like that. Okay. Now I'm going to go to the Darkei Tshuva. The Darkei Tshuva, before we say Darkei Tshuva, I have to say three things. You understand, even say Shiloh. Okay, first of all, in Hilchos Shabbos it says that if a choyle she'ein bo sakana needs to eat hot food or fresh food or whatever his need is, he needs to eat food on Shabbos that you don't have. So a yid can't cook for him. He's only choyle she'ein bo sakana. Okay, a yid can't cook for him. A guy could from Hilchos Shabbos. The guy could cook for him. The guy will let him cook and make him food. So the shiloh is, or in cases that he's allowed to. The shiloh is that the food's going to be bishul akum, and the Machaber says that a choyle she'ein bo sakana is allowed to eat bishul akum. Okay, so you don't have a choice. On a regular Tuesday, the yid can't help in the cooking. On Shabbos, the yid can't help in the cooking, and therefore the din is a choyle is allowed to eat bishul akum. Okay, that's one thing. Second is the Machaber in Kufid Gimel, which is what the Darkei Tshuva is on, has two shittas as to whether you have to kasher after bishul akum. Okay, he brings 2 days as whether you do or don't have to kasher after the klima use bishul akum, and it's assumed that we're makrin for that, and that you do have to kasher after bishul akum. Because the Machaber doesn't say, but that's what we assume. Okay, and the last thing before I tell you what the shiloh is that the bishul akum is bought abroad. Okay, bishul akum is bought abroad. Now with all this together, so the shiloh is the Darkei Tshuva talks about it like this: if a guy cooks on Shabbos for a yid, which he's allowed to, and the food is bishul akum, so Darkei Tshuva says, so you have to kasher kelim. You just cook bishul akum in the kli. We go like the Machaber that says you have to kasher after bishul akum. So the guy, tomorrow, someone's sick and the guy cooks him a piece of chicken, so he just made the kelim tray from bishul akum, so you should have to kasher the kelim after Shabbos. Okay, now this, it happens to be, just as an aside, this is really to get to a different shiloh, which is a Aruch shiloh, which is when the Chazal were matir choyle to eat bishul akum on Shabbos, they say is the food is bishul akum, but you're allowed to eat it anyhow. So a food is it's awesome, but you're allowed to eat it anyhow. In which case, we understand you have to kasher the kelim. Or do they say that the isur bishul akum doesn't apply when a choyle needs it on Shabbos? Okay, it's like a hutra and chuyev kind of a shiloh. Okay, which is, it happens to be, it's a big machlokes. It's a machlokes rishonim, a machlokes achronim. It's a seer in the Mishnah Berurah about it. There's a very famous seer we'll talk about later. That's a very famous seer in the Mishnah Berurah because of the story that came afterwards. But anyhow, there's a big shiloh whether that's true. Does the food after Shabbos, can somebody else eat it? Could the choyle himself eat it after Shabbos? Because that's a machlokes in Aruch machlokes, whether the choyle is allowed to eat it after Shabbos is over. Okay, and is the food hutra? I know, but it's brought in Aruch. The child is in Aruch. No, it's half and half. Parts of it in Yoreh and parts in Aruch. But yeah, it's talked about in that. But he's assuming that the food is also after Shabbos. I mean, the food is bishul akum. So the child says you should have to kasher the kelim. So he says, So are you allowed to kasher the kelim right when Shabbos ends? Which is what you would expect to do. The guy cooked it on Shabbos, so should you kasher? So he says, wait a second. The Ramah says you're not allowed to, you always have to kasher when the kli is Aino ben Yomin. So he says, but in case, no, he's understanding that he means literally. So he says, so if it's Aino ben Yomin, you have to wait till Sunday to kasher. You have to wait till it's Aino ben Yomin before you kasher it.
The Ramah is talking about Pesach.
The Ramah is talking about Pesach. So the Ramah by Pesach, where you're allowed to kasher ben Yomoy, you're really allowed to. But I think you're allowed to. The Ramah says there's a chumrah to never kasher Aino ben Yomin. Because you might go.
It's not relevant to Pesach.
What'd you say?
Even if it's not relevant to Pesach.
Yeah, well, if you wouldn't do it by Pesach, because the chash of Basa B'chalav or chash of Clay Isser, kosher came by other things. But Pesach is the most complicated. You have 1/4 the kasher for Pesach. There's no reason.
No, you can't. In Pesach, there's a massive kashering going on. Right, you kasher milk, you kasher flesh, you kasher everything. So then they don't make the school right in the game.
Okay.
You're wrong. You're kashering 1 kid. You got a problem with 1 kid. You don't know the milk and flesh and this and that.
So you're trying to like
your days is the same thing. So me, it's only kasher Aino ben Yomin.
Okay. Anyhow, okay. So the Dr. Tshuva says like this. The Dr. Tshuva says the Ramah's meaning doesn't apply by Bishlakim. If the bli was Bishlakim, he says because by Bishlakim the bli is above the baroi. Well, he says so anybody, any he doesn't use these words, but any moron can tell that there's more water than there is kli. Okay, that's obvious that it's going to be like that, and therefore there's no reason for the minig. The minig is because you might not have shishim, because shishim is a very sophisticated thing to calculate. Is there shishim or is there not? Here, it's obvious that there's shishim. I mean, it's almost impossible to not have shishim in the kli. Okay. I mean, it's only possible if you do a lot of kelim, but it's almost impossible. So therefore, it's complete. It's mutter to do. It's mutter to kasher when it's ben yomis or mitzvah Shabbos. The Shabbos ends. You kasher the kelim that they will use on Shabbos. Okay, so he's like in between. This Dr. Tshuva is like in between the two psalim. He's saying really the Ramah means you can only kasher when it's ben yomis. You're not allowed to use the kul of shishim, but he's willing to leave a little opening for cases where it's easy, it's obvious that you're going to have your.
How do you know he holds the kid to shishim?
Because he says you're only allowed to do it by Bishlakim because you're only allowed to do it by Bishlakim because it's so obvious that there's going to be shishim that there's no reason for a minig in that case. There's no need to be machmir to make such a minig for those kind of people. I mean, for the normal shishim, I think his words even that's hard to calculate whether the shishim or not.
Says it's mutter, he's all right.
No. He explains this all. I think he even uses the word that shishim is hard to calculate, so the choishes made a gzer like shishim matu that you calculate wrong, which there's no zeicher of that over here, but he's like saying that's what you understand it. But in a case where it's obvious that there's no problem. Okay, so now there are 2 possible kulos come out of this Dr. Tshuva. Okay, now you realize we're starting with a chumrah. We're starting with a chumrah says the Ramah means you must do Aino ben Yomin, you can't do shishim, and now we're having 2 possible kulos off of that. The first one is this is Rabbi Shechta suggested. He said so this whole chumrah is because people who are kashering. Every Joe Schmo kashrus, they might not realize all these details like not parnas and calculating shishim, so therefore they made it like an across the board rule. You have to have Aino ben Yomin. So Rabbi Shechta says. So therefore, if you have mashgiach overseeing a kashering, this is not just any shmendrik off the street. This guy is the mashgiach. This guy, his job is to watch out for the kashrus and make sure he does the kashering right. So maybe for him there's no such clear. Okay, for him there's no such clear. Okay, so now aside from the fact that we might question whether every person who we send for kashering qualifies for Rabbi Shechta had in mind. Okay, we could question that from that side of it. But the next thing he said, you'll see, we'll wait 3 minutes.
So really fine. The Ramah is like a session to me.
Okay, but you'll see. Just wait till I say the second thing he said. We'll get back to the grape juice. Then you'll see really why what he says is very hard to me. I don't know if he ever said lamaisa. He had talked about such a tzad. I think it's even in writing such a tzad that maybe it doesn't apply to people. I don't know if he ever said it lamaisa. That kind of thing. Now. The second kula is the other one that's much more famous, which is there's another thing which is bottled in a lesser amount. Okay, Bishlakim is bottled baroi, but stam yayin is bottled b'shisha. So shisha is a normal kli will have shisha connected. The water will be 6 times the volume of the water will be 6 times as much as the volume of the kli. So maybe in those kind of cases, we get extend what Dr. Tshuva said from Bishlakim to even to the cases of stam yayin. And when a person is kashering from stam yayin, they can kasher even if it's ben yomer, if there's shisha in the kli connected, because even though the Ramah is being understood to say that it's a minute you must be in ben yomer, he doesn't mean that in cases like this. He only means it in cases where the food is needs shishin to be mevatler. But where the food needs a lesser amount, which is easy to tell what it is, like bittul b'roim or bittul b'shisha, then there's no such minhag, and you could just kasher the normal way, so to speak, which is just make sure the shisha that you don't end up with getting yourself into trouble. Okay, that's what he said. So this kula has a huge nafkamina, which is what it was said for, which is for beverage companies. Okay, that usually beverage companies, the only things that straight for either things that don't need to kasher through, like carmine, the things that don't affect the kelim, and the big trace thing that's in those plants is grape juice. So if you say that after stam yayin, you could kasher when it's ben yoma, so not only is that the main trace thing, I forgot to add this, beverage companies, their business is to make 100 different products at a time. They're always making an hour's worth of this and 6 hours worth of this. They're always changing products from one to the other. They don't make one. They don't just make Pepsi all day. They make 100 different products. So they love to change back and forth. They don't like being restricted to having to make kosher every Monday morning, then make kosher, and then milchus and treif afterwards, and be so restricted that on the Tuesday morning they can't make treif because or else they mess up the whole week. So they like to be able to switch back and forth. So telling them you don't have to be in the binyome, and instead you could just do a kashering anytime you want to. You can kasher anytime you want to. You make treif till 12, and by 12:30 you'll be back up in business. I was in a place they had a timer. They watched how many minutes it took them to switch from product to product, and if they did regular switch over, it was like 12 minutes, and with kashering it was like 24 minutes. It was like they counting the minutes of how many minutes it took them to get from one product to the next product. So they love the flexibility. So he said, so for these people, the minhag that says you have to be in the binyom, it doesn't apply. Not the din. The minhag doesn't apply. So you just go with the din, and the din is it's bittul b'shisha, and everything's fine. Okay. Now, this psak that he gave, which Rabbi Dusky went along with us, but this psak was like whoa, people love this psak, and became very popular. People are very familiar with this psak. But the logic of the psak, which is that there's going to be 6 times as much water as the kli, was lost. That didn't make it in the translation, and he added a caveat. He made a special condition in what he said, which is, he said, the Dr. Tshuva says that since it's obvious that there's more water than kli, so by bishlachim you could do it. So he said by stam yayin you could only do it also if it's obvious that there's 6 times as much water as there is kli. Now, not even that there should be 6 times as much, but it should be obvious, it should be partial. Like when you think of it, you have a big pot. If there's 6 times, yeah, of course, the shop says it's like 20 or 30 times usually. So there's 6 times. So no problem, you can catch it. But he said it has to be obvious. So that was, forget about it, no one knew that. Even though he underlined it and made it in bold. Okay, that was put in underlined and bold, and it was given to, the psak was for Rabbi Grossman, who Rabbi Grossman was, at that time, took care of, I think, all the beverage companies. Rabbi Grossman was the editor of the Kashrus, who printed it there in underlined, in bold, and English, no less. That's what you have to, it has to not only be shisha connected, it has to be obvious that the shisha connected. Okay? But with all that, all these rules that just went out, and everyone only heard one thing, which was, you can kasher from stam yayin to regular things, even if it's ben yoma. Because that's what we heard. Okay? But this is a very big problem with this. Okay? The problem is, that those same beverage companies that love to switch back and forth usually use plate heat exchangers, and they usually use fillers that have 25, 50 nozzles going around them, and there's so much metal in these systems. Okay, there's so much metal in there, so much blia that's absorbed into there that there's usually not shisha. Not that there's usually not even obvious shisha with Rabbi Shachtaman. Usually isn't even shisha at all. One last thing that makes it bad is that the way they clean this equipment, they don't bring in water from the outside. They don't flush water through. They take the surge tank, they fill it up with water and chemicals, whatever they have to do, and then they run the water through the system and then back to the surge tank. They make this little loop of water. They recycle the water. What?
CIP tank?
Right. Most of these beverage companies do not come from an outside CIP tank that flushes through and then it goes, it's the CIP system. Most of them within the system.
Add detergent into the surge tank.
Exactly. They fill it up with water, put in their chemicals, run it around, and then drain it out, and then just run water, whatever the system is. They will work right from the system. The guy who's standing there finishes running through trays, puts in the next thing and flushes it through. They don't usually use a CIP, right? And it turns out that from the math of it, it takes the Aruch 10 minutes of new water flowing through this equipment before you'll have bittul b'shisha.
Wow. How'd you figure this out? And weigh the equipment?
No, we measure the equipment. Okay.
Measure that plate heat. How do you measure the volume of the metal?
So we measure the actual size of it, okay, and then use tables from the manufacturers to know how much metal is in there versus how much ear space. In other words, if the heat exchanger is 25 inches long, that's not all metal, right? The space in between, but it's about 50% metal. Okay? The metal and the space. So we had numbers from
how much it weighs? The weight per cubic.
Well, okay, I don't know which one is easier, but in this case, we knew the numbers from the manufacturers of how much percent metal there is versus ear. The plates are very close together. There's just a drop of ear in between, and we made a question. Then we did pipes and we did fillers. Each of the pieces we went around piece to piece. The plates were the hardest because there's space in between. Okay, and made a question of it takes 10 minutes worth of water flowing through to make the shisha. Okay, now so guys, in these systems there isn't 10 minutes. There's 2 minutes worth. You fill up the tank. And then for all that, there's not very much water in there. For that water to run through, it takes a minute. And then the same water keeps going around and around. It's not new water. So to get it, you have to have like a CIP system that brings water from the outside and drains in it. Or, in one of David's plants, they do their Kashering off of a big tank. Not the littlest tank that's there, but a nice sized tank. And the one shisha. And one of his other systems, they used not a plate heat exchanger, they used a tubular heat exchanger. Okay, those have much less metal to them. Okay, tubular, there's one tube inside of another tube. They have much less metal to them than the plate ones do. Okay, so there are places that you could do it, and there are places that have added on. They said, we'll make our surge tank a little bit bigger, or we'll work off of a different tank instead of the surge tank. But if you do it just the standard way, you will not have shisha. You won't have anywhere near shisha in the water connected to the bleed that's in the kli. So here we're talking about that the mashgiach was told straight out by Rebbe Shachar what you have to do, okay? And he didn't get it. So if you think about the first thing Rebbe Shachar said, which is that when you send the mashgiach, he of course will understand all the subtleties of the din and get it all just right. That whole Ramah wouldn't apply. So here we have mamish in the same situation, and he told them, I'm telling you, it's underlined and bold, and in English, in the Kashrus, printed, sent to all of them by the RC who takes care of these companies, right? So it couldn't get much better than that, and yet people do it wrong. All over the place, people getting it wrong because they're not remembering that there's a cheshbon here. It has to be shisha in the water. You can only do it. Well, whatever. It's exactly what we were saying before. It's a detail that's too sophisticated for most people to keep in mind all the time. I mean, it's a very foreign detail. So that would be the reason why the Ramah says Dominic is always being Benjamin. Now.
All the stuff applies to Kashering with a pagima also?
No, if you do pagima, if you're Kashering with a pagima, that's like a different angle. I should have mentioned that. Kashering with a pagima is like a different thing, which is to say, maybe we should have talked about that. Kashering with a pagima is a separate thing, which says, I will make it artificially like an Aino Benyamin. I'm going to be pagima that will artificially turn it into an Aino Benyamin. So that saying is, I'm doing what Ramah says. Ramah says you have to be Aino Benyamin. I'm making it Aino Benyamin. I'm speeding up the process. You know?
So you realize that in Rabbi Gersten, and one of his few things about for Kashering, just said.
What did he say?
He says it's got to be even with beginners it's being.
Okay, so we can talk about that later. Okay.
I know in your company there's two things. Number one, famous Stein is in Honim outside the Goyish companies.
Yes.
So therefore the mix up to the makel. And number two, that the nice and the estimate is really Tashmish B'Shechar, those heat exchangers.
Let's say. Maybe that's a question. If it's from great, then it's Tashmish B'Shechar. Let's say.
So maybe it could be the minute does not apply. So what?
Why is the minute not applied?
And that's the fact going to be mutter anyways.
The product is going to be mutter, B'Diavad will be mutter.
Okay.
We hold the Tashmish B'Shechar as well.
Why not B'Diavad? Why say B'Diavad?
B'Diavad meaning the amount that's going to flow through, the bleeds that come out will be bottled into the food. You make grape juice and you make apple juice.
We don't know if that's
the apple juice will be mutter B'Diavad.
Why you saying it's only B'Diavad? Because the Shulchan is not Aino Benyamin?
Because the Mechaber are more than the we hold it's only B'Diavad only if it's Aino Benyamin also.
That's right.
Okay.
But that's the Chachila. It's Aino Benyamin that's not
Well, the whole point here is to avoid Aino Benyamin. That's what we're trying to get at.
It's not good on the minute. How the minute of the market is the estimate follows anyone doesn't know.
So now you tell me another reason not to be choshesh of the minute. So don't be choshesh, but do the din. The din is that there has to be shisha in the water. You don't want to do the minute. You tell me another reason to not do the minute because you have good. It's a kosher company, and it's going to be the product that's going to be made is going to be kosher with the other. So then you have so now kosher like you're supposed to. So the din is you have to have 6 times as much water.
It's not the shoe with a minute.
Okay, fine. Okay, so you're right. We get out of it that way if you want to.
So I understand. Why don't they just use a beginning? If they want to be able to do Benyamin.
I think that the reason for that is I'm not sure. I think that the reason is because to do that you have to have mashgiach there. Who's going to make sure that they do that? So to do, once you have to have the Mashiach, we just lost what we wanted. The whole game was...
I don't think the sterilization process allows for Pegim in this time, because a lot of the Pegim are not going to work on both.
Okay. In a normal dairy, it's things that
in the CIP, at 150 and 60, they use the Pegim. But when you do the sterilization to 12, to 30, to 40...
Okay. So I'm thinking, I was going to say something. Maybe I'm going to leave part of this for next time, because you mentioned about Pegima. Maybe I should talk about Pegima. I don't think we've done that yet. About being Pegim things. Maybe I should stick that in here, because that's an artificial way of making Eino Binyamin. It's okay, so I'm going to not say something else. I'm going to say that I'll stick with that. So I'm going to leave that. I have to just say that there are those who said the opposite, sort of an opposite of what we're saying. I think we once talked about this, which is, just back to Dr. Tshuva for a second, which was that Dr. Tshuva said that if it's Bishal Akum, the Bli is above the Baroiv, since the Bli is above the Baroiv, therefore you can cash it even with Ben Yemen, because it's obvious that could be bit the Baroiv. Okay? So he's talking about cashing with Ben Yemen from Bishal Akum. The people suggested that if a Kli is Aino Ben Yemen from Bishal Akum, we shouldn't have to cash it at all. Because I think we... What? I think... Okay. The Dr. Tshuva is okay. And his... If it's trade from Bishal Akum, and it's Aino Binyamin, you shouldn't have to kasher at all. Why? Because it's Aino Binyamin, and it's a Kashrus b'Shefa. Because anything you're going to cook in this thing is going to be butter, not the Baroiv. So therefore, you should be able to kasher it with a chila. Okay, that's what. That's not true. You should be able to use that kasher at all.
If you put a little bit in the pot, you just you put in a small portion in the pot. So it's going to be.
If you think if I put in a small amount, and we hold Chametz Chelsea beans believe that even the other part, then okay, fair. You talk about commercially when the people are going to always put into the pot at least a certain amount of it, so maybe you can get away with it, which is actually where the Shiloh came up. It was a company that made some foods. I think they were drying foods, and some of them were like cooking, like let's say potato and rice. Some of the things were Bishal Akum, which has give hashgach on the other things that are not Bishal Akum and don't even bother with kashrut. Okay, so if they arrange it that they do this at the end of the week, so then it'll always be Aino Binyamin and it'll be Shulchan b'Shefa. Okay, now I think we once talked about this, but there's a question on this. Okay, and the question is, what'd you say? Yes, always throw that in. It's always worth it. Okay.
We use it all the time every weekend.
Chas v'shalom, if those companies should come visit the Gerus Commission, and become kosher, come to
what do we do? I know.
We kasher every day, every week. What do you mean? Oh, we don't kasher. We do spread.
Okay.
We don't kasher.
The question on this, what I just said to you is the question. I don't know what the answer is, but the question is like this. The Mechaber holds that also the Shulchan b'Shefa is mutter even if it's Ben Yemen. He doesn't need any Ben Yemen. That's only the Taz and the Shach. The Mechaber holds that it's mutter even when it's Ben Yemen. Okay, so why does the Mechaber say why does he bring the day that you have to kasher after Bishal Akum? If it's also the Shulchan b'Shefa, so what are you doing kashering? What do you have to kasher for at all?
Yeah, other things. Okay, now a spoon, took a spoon, stuck in the Bishal Akum.
Yeah.
You're not going to have
what are you going to do with the spoon afterwards? Anything you stick it into, when you take the spoon later and you'll stick it into a piece of food, there's going to be roiv in the food connected to kli. So maybe it's for your.
I think it's to take a ladle, put it in the shop, and then I take a ladle and put it in the ladle soup. I take it out.
Yes. How much soup is in the ladle? Look at how much metal is in the ladle. Look at how much. There just has to be more liquid than ladle. So maybe it's for your case. Maybe you answered it before. You said maybe it's like a pot. I might use a small amount in that pot. And if you hold the Chametz Chelsea chashus, you get a lot of bli into a little thing. Maybe that's what you mean.
Come to tell you need a kasher. There's no
hechatimsa. There's no hechatimsa. There's no. What does that mean? What's the?
He said Shulchan. He just tells you that the halacha is that you have to kasher. Now you have this hefter of the street of fine, but that's not.
So it had like almost no application. So maybe his case is
there's no application, almost no application. It's not quite the street I guess you have to kasher altogether, right? Some say you don't altogether.
What is it? Why would anybody say? Why would anybody say the kasher altogether? What's the? Okay, so maybe this is an answer. Okay,
what's about Tzli? The one who won't work by Tzli because it's not in Mishpachah b'Shavet.
Okay, so maybe we'll get out of it. Maybe we can say go out of it. I have to tell you, we talked about. I seem to remember that we talked about this when we talked about Rabbi Shechter's idea that you may have to kasher kelim even if you don't have to kasher them. Okay, there might be such an inyan to kasher kelim even if you don't have to. That's what we talked about. Yeah, we'll leave that. So I think I was going to say something else, but I was going to leave it. Maybe we'll do next time. I think next week July 4th. Yeah, it is. So next time, Rich Hashem will do being Pogum things and there's other things. and this other thing from Rabbi Schechter, this other thing that I was going to mention now, we'll just leave it, which is related to this. Okay.